And welcome to the Crash Chords podcast. Matt, John, Steve, doing the usual thing that they do every week.
Who was that masked man? Someone was sitting in Steve's seat. Steve, you missed it. Some guy was doing the intro this week.
Oh, I missed him?
Yeah, he's already gone.
Dang. It was really odd, wasn't he?
He was a little odd.
Yeah.
I got a lock of his hair.
Are you going to throw it down a well and make a wish?
No.
You're just going to hold on to it and be weird. Because
I'm actually going to do
you
DNA
collect
testing.
locks of people's hair, apparently.
Because this is what they never do in, like, superhero anything. They don't ever take all the blood that Spider-Man, shed and test it for DNA.
Wait, are you saying he was a superhero?
Yes, he was. Wow. He's a pretty superhero.
Find out what his name was.
He's a pretty superhero.
He kind of showed up, we hit record, and then he vanished. Anyway.
That's probably his only power.
Probably to disappear on command.
That's right.
Probably.
To disappear on command.
That'd be the lamest superpower ever.
That's
or
pretty
the best.
cool, yes. He's only invisible when nobody's looking.
So welcome again to another week. Last night was the 24... As we were recording, last night was the 24-hour musicals, a project that I was only a guest of last year, and I actually worked at this year. I've become good friends with all of the members of the 24-hour company who produced the plays and the musicals. So I got to work the overnight this year, making sure the writers and the composers were able to come up with enough content for the next morning. And it was a lot of fun. It was great. There was money raised. The musicals were a lot of fun. Most of them were very well written. We had some big stars. Actually, one of the surprising stars that we had, one of the performers, I can't remember her name, I'm blanking on it now, but it was one of the original members of the Weather Girls who sang It's Raining Men, was one of the performers in one of the musicals, which was kind of awesome. And they actually worked into the musical she was in, her singing a line of it and then going, no, stop, which was meta and fun.
Meta and fun.
Exactly. Not all meta things are fun.
Not all fun things are meta.
That's also true.
Yeah.
But there's usually enough overlapping to make them almost synonymous.
Well, now that we've identified exactly what it was and what it wasn't.
But it was a lot of fun, and they were great performances all around, and I had a great time. And I'm looking forward to actually being a part of the LA not Broadway, but the LA 24-hour plays, which are over the summer. I'm going to be flying out with Sarah to be a part of that, which will be a lot of fun too, because they get all the big sitcom writers and sitcom stars to do it, so they're a little goofier, which is always fun.
I thought it was pretty goofy, actually.
Well, the musicals often lead more towards goofy because it's easier to write a musical that's funny on short notice than to write a sweeping drama. It's been done, but it's not as easy.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it was great. And
I'm more curious to see the sweeping dramas, just because
there have been a
few.
few
So ambitious.
They've done some serious ones that have gone very well, and it's just the only thing that's a shame about the 24-hour plays and musicals is that it's all contained within this, and you'll these songs you'll probably never hear again, and they were really good, a lot of them.
Well, it was one of my points when I was watching this, because I figured a lot of times, especially with certain artists, when you compress your train of thought into a short span of time and you're not permitted to break that train of thought, you could do really amazing things that way. Because the thing is, usually you have to, pull away, go to sleep, you go back, and then sometimes there's a hiatus in there. But a lot of times that's how ideas get lost. That's how ideas get dropped, because you don't feel into it as much the second day as you did the first day. But if you don't permit yourself to break it, then you can create really amazing things. I think that's the whole premise of the 24-hour play.
Yeah, the standout of the musicals for me was Four First Songs, which was composed by Lance Horne and written by Jonathan Mark Sherman, the well-known playwright, who I actually befriended over the weekend, and he seemed very interested in the podcast, so hopefully we'll get him on towards the end of the year. He's a New York local. He's written some really great plays, which of course I don't know any of the names off the top of my head because I didn't do any research. Like I always do. But I'm hoping to have him on towards the end of the year. It'd be a lot of fun. Why don't you tell us a little bit, Steve? I remember you telling me off the air you had a news story that was actually really... We haven't done news in a while, but you had a really big thing.
There's actually a band out there who was using Spotify with in a way that I never even thought to use it before, which is... The idea is that, of course, if a band wants to be very altruistic about their work and they want to, offer as much free stuff to their fans as possible, after all, they owe their popularity to their fans and everything, which most bands don't have an obligation to do. Of course, they have an obligation to make money to themselves and everything, but if they want to be that altruistic, there are ways now where you can actually have a whole entire tour for free. So this band had a pretty incredible idea.
So what's the band? Do you remember the name?
I do not remember the name offhand, but I'll have that filled in. It'll be on the Facebook page later.
Okay.
Wolf.
Wolf something.
Wolfswagen.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, there are probably only so many bands that begin with Wolf.
And the album was called... I remember the album was called Sleepify.
Sleepify, that's right. Because the idea is you take Spotify, of course... Whenever you listen to a song on Spotify,
the artist gets a tiny amount of money, yeah.
Like half a cent, less than a half a cent, right?
Yeah.
And every single time someone listens to that song, of course, those cents do rack up. So conceivably, if you were to just play these songs all through the night, just go to sleep, it's like you're barely asking your fans to do anything. Just press play, make sure you have the repeat button on, go to sleep. You wake up in the morning, and that's probably accumulated to a few dollars. Imagine adding that up for every single fan, and now the band actually has a substantial amount of money that they can dump into their own tour, so that every fan now has a free ticket, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's a free tour. That's outstanding.
And the other interesting thing is they said they're going to track the tour patterns based on where it's listened to the most. So wherever there are more people listening to it, they're going to go to those cities. It's a unique idea. I don't know how well it's going to work, but we'll see. I mean,
I think it may very well work.
It has potential to work, but sometimes... See, the thing about crowdsourcing is it can sometimes crash and burn. Like, thankfully, friends of the podcast, Eli August and the Abandoned Buildings, which is composed of parts of the Wasties, they recently did a Kickstarter, which I believe I posted on the Crash Chords page, for their new EP. And they actually ended up raising the $6,000 they needed. But it took pretty much almost until the end of the fundraising period. I know other people who have done fundraising and not made their goal, not even halfway made their goal, basing it on the support of their fans. So it's tough.
You make a good point. Crowdsourcing definitely can crash and burn, but it's the kind of thing, it's like voting. It's like no one can really predict, as much polls as you have, no one can really predict voter turnout and whatnot. Sometimes people just disappoint. So this is more of I'm putting it out there.
Yeah.
Support these guys. Please try. I would love for this project to work, because it would say something about, their very generous idea and personal fan go-get-itness.
Yeah, totally. Speaking quickly back, though, to crowdsourcing and the new Eli August EP, I did help fund it, and we're going to be... I think I might be able to get the tracks early. If I do, I will do maybe a little quick review on the website about it, just chat about it, and where to find it and stuff. But let's take this time now to jump into our album this week. It's my pick. Been a while since one of us has been able to pick an album. We had 2 guests back to back.
At the trade-off.
Yeah, no, of course, but they brought us some great music, or at least interesting, unique music. Mm-hmm. But this week we're going back to some pop music, but not just any pop music. This is the new album GIRL by Pharrell Williams. Of course, we've talked about Pharrell because he was heavily featured on Daft Punk's new record, and he's been doing production on other records that we've mentioned or featured.
There was another album that we did that had Pharrell featured.
Yeah.
Well, we also spoke to what was going on with the Grammys and everything like that.
And he performed for Happy
was
this
a pretty
year.
big thing back then.
And of course, it's important this week. Of course, he's first of all, when was this album released? It's very recent, right?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago at the most. I think.
And coinciding with that, he performed on Saturday Night Live this past Saturday, and he performed 2 songs from this album, which will be the first one, as well as Happy, which has been around for a while as a single.
From Despicable Me too.
Yeah.
So the new album did come out about a month ago, and I've been interested in doing it since I saw it come out. I'm a big fan of Pharrell from back in the day when he was in NERD.
Same here.
I love, what is it, Fly or Die?
Fly or Die.
Fly or Die was great. And do you remember the name of the album before Fly or Die?
It was In Search Of.
In Search Of.
Yeah.
And I love In Search Of because that's what got me hooked on them. The song Lap Dance, which was huge. It was everywhere the year it came out.
it was Fly or Die. For me, that was the breakthrough album. In Search Of, I could have taken it or leave it. I feel like they were still in their formative years back then. But then Fly or Die came out, and it I wouldn't say it exploded, but it had quite a good amount of popularity.
No, yeah.
And in my opinion, that really defined their style.
Sure.
Which was very unique within the sort of fusion rock, hip-hop, or rock R&B framework.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, I was just saying that Lap Dance was their first hit single, one of their first big hit singles, and was featured in a lot of movies at the time.
Yeah.
So that's what got them going. But Pharrell is also, as we were saying before, a well-known producer and a great one at that. But this is his solo record. I think it's his second true solo record. And he has some guests on this album with him that he features, and we'll get to that when we get to those songs. But let's jump right into the first track, Marilyn Monroe.
I want to say a couple things just generally about... it's apparent right away that his style, from when I remember him back in the days of NERD, has really carried over. There's some new things, and there's definitely new elements immediately right up front here. But I can detect his songwriting style a mile away. And that's a good thing. It really signifies him as a musician. I mean...
He has a signature style, for sure.
Yeah, especially as a producer. That's kind of hard to make your mark that way, and he's definitely done it. But he also had some help on this album, and especially in this first song here. Somehow he was able to team up with Hans Zimmer, who actually did the arranging. He's the well-known composer. He's done for many movies. We've talked about Hans Zimmer before, and he joined in with the arranging for this first song.
It's got a gorgeous classical intro, classical contemporary intro. It's very sweeping, and then it kind of blends very much with the beat work right off the get.
See, I wouldn't say contemporary classical, just because it's orchestral, of course.
Okay, so orchestral.
It's really cinematic. Actually, that's really the way it begins.
That's a better way of describing it.
It's Hans Zimmer doing what he knows, because he's always done, cinematic work. But, some could argue that it was a little bit disingenuous, because then it goes into something that's almost a little bit drastically different. In some ways, yes, in some ways, no. Because, first of all, we're looking at a song here which is sort of an homage to, of course, The Girl. That's the title of the album.
Yeah.
Girl. It's all about girls. You're going to get a lot of that on this album, so be prepared for it. But in general, the intro itself sort of had this sweeping style, like it was building up to sort of a grand event. And then it sort of retracted a little bit, and just all the instruments, all of the stringed instruments went back to plucking instead of actually bowing, very majestically. Instead, it was all just these little compliments throughout the album. It actually took the role of what you'd expect in sort of a hip-hop backbeat.
Right. And for me also the standout thing about Pharrell, and you get it just right off the bat in the first song, is not only the style in which he sings, but the actual way in which he sings. He uses an articulation that's very unique to him, that we've spotted in other songs that you've commented on before. Mm-hmm. And this song was no different.
Well, part of it is just the falsetto. The falsetto is as I was saying before, there's definitely his songwriting style is unique, but his falsetto is even more unique than that, because, it's almost a little bit ubiquitous in hip-hop music, or R&B in general at this point. Having a falsetto, but no one that I've seen does it as well as Pharrell Williams.
Yeah. And I was kind of craving a R&B album for a while. We reviewed CeeLo Green's Christmas album, but it wasn't really an R&B record in the same sense that his solo record was. And so I'm still craving a new CeeLo Green album, and this is kind of filling the void.
That was also more soul.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I've been very quiet. Very, very quiet. I think I said 4 words so far, and that's because I really felt that this introductory string work, which I wouldn't even say was orchestral, it was groovier than that. And I think it
wasn't in the very beginning.
No, but
that's what I'm saying, why it blended. Perhaps
I think it blended well. But aside from that, there was not much else going on in this first track.
That's not true.
No, the verses are extremely safe, beat-wise. Extremely safe. The chorus work, it tends to be the more preferable part of the actual song, and even that is just put on a loop anyway. I felt like it's just not very deep here.
See, I gotta disagree, at least this early on in the album. I think this is a pretty powerful opener. As we get on later, there are verses that don't go as deep as you might want them, but this needs to be set up front. It needs to be set up front. Strictly, this album here is a dance album. So you're gonna have to accept that there are definitely points where it will repeat, but even so, within the dance work framework, I think there's moments where it really burgeons forth, especially in the lyric work. That's why I'm surprised you mentioned that about the verses. I already said I could sort of take or leave the classical arrangement here. The string arrangement in general, because it's just there. If it wasn't the strings doing that, it would be other instruments doing that, as you would find on an R&B album. But what is impressive is his melodies. His melodies are as strong as they ever were, and that's something that's fairly strong here.
But I'm speaking
for a dance
specifically to that third section, that third verse of this song, which was a extreme departure from what was actually being built throughout the rest of the song, and it was a really disappointing tease for the piece itself, for the song itself, because that was the part that really I thoroughly enjoyed.
Are you talking about the interlude?
Yeah, the interlude.
The really quiet interlude?
The really
that's
cool,
funny.
quiet interlude.
It's a departure. All right, this is you are bringing me to a second point here, and this is one critique I have, is that interlude, which we're talking about like utter silence here. After this has been a very busy song. There's a lot of stuff going on earlier on here. Of course, you've got a lot of the funk guitar peppered throughout this. I love the way he kind of goes back to funk, and then you have a lot of sort of the clarinet working with like the drum box the second the interlude approaches. Again, the clarinet is throughout, but here everything just filters down to this simple sort of... the reason I call it an interlude is because it almost sounds like it should be a transition to a totally new section, or like we're going to get like a whole drastically different part B, because it's just the drum box, that single, I think it's a bass clarinet, just hovering overhead, and then almost nothing else. You have no lyrics, nothing else. But then it just goes right back to the chorus, and I really wanted more at that point, because such tension, such emphasis was placed on that one moment in the track.
And that's where I'm coming up with a lot of problems with the verse work. The verse work it just seems so face value musically that while the chorus has a complexity, to be able to do something with that interlude that just really just degenerates, and then I wanted something with that. It seemed like a great idea that just didn't get flushed.
I don't know. I don't find that interlude was as much make or break as both of you did. I can see the complaints and they make sense, but for me, it was just like... I can only agree in the sense that because they did so little with it, I feel like they could have just not had it and it would have been fine.
I think that might have actually worked better for me. I would have liked the rest of the song better if I didn't get something that was so off the wall.
See, and I don't feel like it kills the song that much, but I can agree that it probably would have benefited from not having that section or doing something with that section, either or. However, the singing and how you're saying the verse and chorus work are so disparaging, I just don't agree.
It's not vocally. It actually is. It's musically.
Okay.
Musically, the verses were kind of just safe.
All right. I mean, I guess I can see that, but again, it's a dance song.
The choruses had a lot more.
It's a dance song, and it's an intro to a dance album, so I get the structure. Whether you don't like it or not,
it's not the structure. It's that there was a lot more texture put into, a lot more layering put into the choruses that was just more interesting.
Which is fine, but I think it flowed between both parts very well, and I didn't like the disparity didn't really bother me as much. I thought it had a nice ebb and flow. And vocally, this album was tight, as you would expect from Pharrell Williams. I mean, the way he speaks and sings, he speaks with an intelligence and sings with an intelligence and a quality that you come to expect from him. And especially like in this song, like Steve always talks about how he likes certain inflections that he does. And in this song, the way he says thorough, and it sounds like thorough. It just adds a fun inflection to the song.
Well,
that really carries
I like creative rhyming. So the thing is, of course, this is sort of the opening to the theme of the album, which again, as I said, is fairly straightforward. It's girls, or at least there was one claim here that actually mentioned how it was sort of a feminist's album in a sense, and I think it's because there was sort of a question mark as to where Pharrell Williams, I saw this in an interview, there's a question mark as to where his views really lied, because of course he has a tendency to go in and out of all these songs, which can sometimes broach, the objective, treating women as objects, or at least they can be interpreted that way. Yeah. He was also the Robin Thicke song.
Well, he produced that,
was featured that song. Yeah, so there have been some criticism about him. So I think this album, in many ways, is sort of solidified that this is what I really think. Yeah. It's like, that's one side, but that's not the only side.
Right.
Of course, my true feelings on girls, I think is what he's saying, are a little bit more filled out here. Yeah. So of course he's saying just somebody who's different, not an object, in other words. Yeah. And that's why you sort of get this anthem, girl, 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 repeated. And that brings me back to the line that you were quoting. Because after it goes girl, 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 and you get that chorusing by the backup singers, which actually may very well be just him.
Yeah.
It's funny because I saw the live SNL performance, and there were backup singers who were doing that high
sure,
voice.
Of course, well, because he
it
can't
may
be
very
his own
well
backup singer.
Exactly. So, but he may, it was probably him in the original recording, maybe doubled. But then there's that line to follow: "Girl, girl, can't another good boy keep it this thorough?" And just the meter within that, the flow of that one line, just has such a ring to it.
He almost says it like THURL, like thorough.
Thorough, yeah.
Yeah.
Like Thurl,
to rhyme it with
like Thurl Ravenscroft.
Yes.
Which we all know.
But all in all, for me personally, as an intro song, it really got me pumped. I enjoyed it. There were, there was a lot of ebb and flow, but I enjoyed it.
It just goes back and forth. I'm really just dead center between you guys in this song. I have my little. I don't think it's a groundbreaking song. I don't think this is the song that's we're going to remember years to come as like, oh, that was such the anthem of 2014 or anything like that. I feel like in many ways he's almost done his damage with that. I feel like Get Lucky is probably going to be around for a while.
And Happy. I mean, Get Lucky and Happy are so positive, straightforward songs that they will overshadow probably anything else on the record.
Yeah. But this was a bold, for me. This was a bold move.
I agree,
and especially considering he got Hans Zimmer to do the arranging and everything. Yeah. It's just I respect what he was going for. It maybe could have gone further, and of course, whenever there's strings, I would always want there to be
more.
I don't like him to just serve the function of a backbeat. So that's one of my.
But at least it wasn't a gimmick where it was in the intro and not in the song at all. At least they were used in the backbeat.
Oh hell, even on the SNL performance, they were there. Yeah. They had the strings in the background, and Hans Zimmer was actually present.
The next track is brand new. This is featuring Justin Timberlake. The song opens with
another one?
Probably.
The song opens with.
I feel bad for that guy.
The song opens with a fun Justin, scatting kind of mouth beat, a beatbox,
a mouth beat,
a mouth beat.
That's a new one.
Well, that's what a beatbox is, I guess, is a mouth beat.
That's exactly what it is. Definitively.
But it was it was fun and upbeat, and it pulls you in, and then
it's instant funk.
Yeah,
that's it's.
Poured
into hot water, you got funk.
Is not the word that I'd use to describe
this. Yeah, this one wasn't as much
later.
fun.
This was a kind of a very, very interesting rhythm here. It went into sort of what I would call a bossa nova-esque type rhythm.
It was like a couple beats off from bossa nova.
Exactly, or I would maybe just sort of put it in the super category of like Afro-Cuban and whatnot. But it was really interesting. You thought it sounded like a sort of an island rhythm and whatnot.
Yeah.
I could get that easily.
But all of those are kind of close together, too. They're not exactly the same, obviously, but they're similar in style.
And then when you get into the meat of this, I thought it was actually pulling from various sides of soul.
Yes.
And it works as a really strange fusion, because you can't quite pinpoint it as bossa nova, can't pinpoint it as soul or Afro-Cuban. So it actually ended up being pretty unique to me. I like when I'm just sort of thrown around between genres.
That's kind of what I like, is they took a classic dance construction and then kind of... They peppered a lot of other stuff over it, so it was a unique experience. It still felt very much like a dance song, but they did enough with the meat of it that it felt fleshed out.
Well, to be clear, they did a lot with the texture of it.
The texture.
The meat could be interpreted differently. Meat I see as substance, and this is the thing. This is a dance song, and to me this felt a little bit constrained, even more constrained than the previous track, than Marilyn Monroe. It was a little bit repetitive. Don't get me wrong. Loved the beat, and loved all of the layering therein. I just feel like, in a linear sense, it needed to go somewhere.
And that, I think, was... The big problem for me was I love the texture of that acoustic electric combination guitar, but it was just playing one chord. I loved the horns that were being used, but they were playing the same 5-note, 4-note progression, and it's just with that you can keep it that same upbeat, which was extremely addictive, but change it up, like really do something with it. Fool around with it. I wanted so much more with that. The parts are there. I just don't think they're being utilized to the full extent of what they can do.
Well, with this song, I mean, I'll admit, I was expecting a lot with Justin Timberlake's name there. I mean, both Pharrell and Justin Timberlake are great producers and great recording artists. I will admit that by the end of the song, it did get a little repetitive. I still like it, and I thought it was very upbeat and catchy, but by the end, I was kind of had enough and was ready for it to end. The problem is, even with all of that texturing, I agree with John to a point that, like, it didn't ruin the song for me, but I agree with John that it did bring it down a little by the end, because it did, even though they were peppering such great textures, the meat of it did get a bit repetitive.
It was becoming the same painting. You're using the same exact colors and brush strokes. You have reds, oranges, yellows, blues, purples. You have all this. You have different brushes. You have different materials. They were just using the same things over and over again in different ways, and that's very bothersome. When I really love the guitar. I really in love that one chord. I wanted all the other chords that go along with it, though.
It's like I said, it's a fault of linear motion. At the moment, I'm blown away. Like in the instant,
yes.
it's a great rhythm. I could groove to that for probably a while, but then I realized maybe I can't groove to it for a while. I don't know. I think this is just the problem you have when you approach something with the dance format, because you're bound to run into this problem. As soon as someone puts their earphones on and says, "I'm going to listen to this album, I'm going to devote my next hour to it," then you're just inviting in all the critiques, because you're not perceiving it in the same context as, of course, a dance floor where you actually can lose yourself. Right. So that's the thing. I could sort of go right in the center on this song too. I love the beat, and obviously he knew he had something good. He knew he had something good. I just think he thought it was enough.
Right. Well, and also
on an album scale, it probably isn't.
Well, that can go either way also. And my argument for that is he's making a dance album. That's the goal here. Penn, ultimately, he wants to make a dance album.
I know, and I feel like we're going to keep coming back to that in various places.
So for me, that doesn't necessarily forgive certain things, but stylistically, it explains some of it. However...
Yeah.
But that leads us directly into Hunter, which
I have one more thing to say about the other thing. We're overlooking a little section here. There is one change-up, and this is one of the main problems I have with Brand New. There's a transition there. Mm-hmm. There's a transition that occurs from one segment to the next, where it does pull. So it's not really the same thing front to back. We get these little moments. I believe they occur around... it's probably the pre-chorus. So I just want to say thank you for this day, because it's so good. Good honey. That's just one example of the kind of lyrics you're getting in these pre-chorus. And there's these sort of, I want to say, dark 70s-oriented keyboard tones that occur here. Very, very interesting chord work. And it's about just 4 chords that build. Occasionally they repeat this pre-chorus, but then the second it's over, it's not a transition into anything. It's just go right back to the chorus. So then we're right back to where we started. It's sort of the same problem. It's analogous to what I mentioned in the previous track, in Marilyn Monroe, where we actually get that interlude, that instrumental interlude, which builds up all this tension, which implies we're going somewhere, but instead we get thrown right back.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a shame, because it was a really, really great idea. It was probably the best idea I ever could have imagined coming from out of this song. It's just there was no follow-through.
No, yeah, that's where it started to get repetitive for me, was after that moment.
Because it did that several times.
Yeah.
So it's just like, oh, are we going somewhere this time? No? Yeah.
And I agree with that. And I do know exactly what part you're talking about, and I'm almost certain as well. It is that pre-chorus piece. It could have gone so much more, but I feel like that might be a running theme I'm going to have here, is things could have gone so much more while remaining true to the style he's writing in. But one song that I think actually really really did hit the mark for me was Hunter. Track 3. And this is one that is going to be hard for me to explain the differences, because it does have a lot of the same problems as Brand New and Marilyn Monroe. I just accept what he's done a little bit more. And I think it might be because this is the first song I'm really getting into the lyrics and what he's singing.
So Hunter is this one is where we get some good old-fashioned funk mixed in with some other stuff. He sings most of the song in this playful falsetto, even doing some speaking at points, and it really does pull you in. It's just one of those kind of groovy songs that...
It relies on different elements. This relies on funk more so than the previous, which was going back and forth within the sort of Afro-Cuban soul thing. But this is really back to funk, and it's heavy in the guitar. I mean, just that sort of curt... I almost hesitate to call it porn guitar,
I can see that,
commonly associated with that. But it's punchy, and it really it helps when you put that over the bass, because then you're getting the full spectrum of range. So
I think that might actually be one of the reasons why I also like it. The beat to me is one of the most infectious ones on the album, just because of the nature of what's being sung here. It's a lot more imagery than we got in the first two songs. Instead of just making similes, he's actually going the full gauntlet of choosing his words. I think a little bit more gut-oriented, as opposed to just stating something. He's getting a little bit shrouded. I show my teeth, and I hope you know that look in my eye, and I got that lightning speed. I won't hesitate to rescue what is mine. And it really doesn't... You could take that multiple ways. But in the context, it's both a dangerous statement and yet something that's kind of sensual. I enjoy that. He's actually throwing a little more layering, and of course the vocals are great with what he's singing. But now I'm getting, what did he really say that? How am I going to take it? I like that.
Well, playfulness in this is actually reminiscent of a lot of 80s and 70s songs that are just kind of playing with the idea of prey and predator and comparing relationships to that, and getting on the hunt and getting there.
Yeah, it's still got that kind of sexy feel that is present in a lot of his work, but it's also got that dangerous aspect, which in a lot of cases enhances that appeal.
It's kind of funny, though, because I almost could see the same problem, these lyrics, as say, one of those critiques against them, that just because it's in the middle of the night, that doesn't mean I won't hunt you down, because up in deep side, it's pulling me and I want your love. It's almost aggressive. Which, of course, that's no stranger to lyrical work that sort of showers a lot of desire upon. But I don't know, I guess I could still kind of take or leave these lyrics. Here I'm biting my tongue a little bit, because the thing is, regardless of the funk riff and everything, I feel like this was even a little bit more repetitive than the previous track.
And that's where I'm going to say, I mean,
considering those transitions that I discussed in the last one, agree. that was at least a shining beacon, amidst still a relatively awesome rhythm. And I'm talking about the last track now. It's at least something. Granted, all right, we've done to death the fact that the previous song was repetitive in a general sense. But the rhythm was great, and sometimes you can't. You just face it. Sometimes you can lose yourself in a certain rhythm.
Absolutely.
And then with those transitions to boot, that was at least something. That was really a big plus. Here, I'm kind of lacking it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love funk. I really, really do. But I don't know. I feel like it's the kind of thing that caters more toward advancement rather than finding the groove and sticking with it. The best kind of funk that I've previously, been attracted to is the kind that goes somewhere. I feel like you can almost get away with it more with an Afro-Cuban beat than you can with funk. Because when funk is stable, it's just so stable.
Yeah,
and it's a little too stable for me.
I got you. Yeah, no, I think with this song, I mean, all I really have to say about it is that I enjoyed the playfulness, I enjoyed the way he sang, but there were repetitive moments in this too, and I do agree that at least Brand New, at least in the beginning, did a little more. But I still enjoyed the song.
I thought, one thing I will give it, I think it's an ambitious song just because it relies more on the development of the lyrical round as opposed to sort of the big drop or the big breakdown.
Yeah.
So it is withholding a lot of that. That's one... I mean, it's ambitious that it thought so much of it itself, I guess, to keep doing that. But in one sense, it really did succeed on the lyric. Because wherever the music fails here, then the lyrics... I mean, the vocal work... The vocal work, not even going to speak to lyrics here, but just the layering in the vocal work is so intricate and so complex that sometimes you really can shift your focus.
Yeah.
Of course, if you're just tapping your foot along and you're just focused solely on the beat and you're not on a dance floor, then yeah, you're probably going to be a little bit bored. But if you shift your focus a little bit toward more of the high end and what he's doing with his voice, there's a lot to be gained.
Yeah. And, I mean, as far as trying different things, I mean, we're really getting more into the meat of that as we go through the album a bit. I mean, Gush, track 4, it leans more towards what you would think a groovy R&B song would be. But they do unique things with the mix that we haven't really seen up until this point.
It was, Gush is, I dare say, guttural for this album.
Oh yeah,
yeah, absolutely. I would definitely.
The layering is where it shines.
Yeah,
I'm specifically talking of the strings and the obvious synth work.
Yeah, there's a production level on this track that I haven't really seen yet.
It does actually start having intricacies associated with it.
Yeah, this is what I was starting to say about it. A dance album and how it's pretty impressive when a dance album actually turns the route of having substance, because we don't usually expect that. But yeah, this really did do that for me. First of all, I also want to say he kind of threw back to his old NERD style, which in my opinion, you can never go wrong with that, because I loved it, and I still think it's relevant today. Even like the kind of stuff I got back in Fly or Die, which is already 2004, 2005, it still holds up in many ways. This is where I sort of get his songwriting style. There's sort of I think guttural was a really good word. I mean, it does have a little bit of a darkness to it, and there is sort of that soul chord progression that I feel is very indicative of what NERD developed, what they were responsible for furthering, I guess, sort of taking the 90s spin on soul and sort of twisting it in a different direction, their own direction, so that now I don't even think 90s. I did briefly, because there are moments here where I almost thought it was like a throwback to Michael Jackson.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
But
that comes later.
I think that's pretty amazing, at the fact that I was able to identify NERD almost a little bit more than I was able to Michael Jackson. That means that they've even turned MJ's style himself and spinned it anew. That's impressive.
Yeah. Well, I also feel like in moments that, I mean, we'll talk when we're done at the end about how much I still feel that way, but I felt, at least from the featuring that I'd seen him with and the singing that he's done, that Pharrell has the capacity to be a modern Michael Jackson, because he's got his hands in so many pies, and he does so many different things, and he really is, like, Michael Jackson, for a lot of things that were problematic, he was very smart, and he was, especially when it came to music and marketing, he was very smart. And Pharrell seems to be following that route. And a song like this, Gush, the R&B moments very much reminded me of late 80s, especially early 90s Michael Jackson.
I think he just knows how to dip into various styles and keep it to his own, so that no matter where he goes, there's still that mark of his own personal signature.
But for all the uniqueness in the actual music, I was kind of disappointed in the lyrical work. And for that, it's just the blatant.
Let's face
sex.
it, we had to have this type of track, I think, on this album. I think it was inevitable, because I think I'm surprised we haven't mentioned this before, but there's something very analogous to Beyonce's album. The Beyonce album. The self-titled album that we discussed back in episode 73. And that album, the Secret album that she released, the one that went under the radar. That album, the theme there, relied on sort of heavy things. Especially, we remember we had a track on that album where it was just all dripping with sex.
Right, well, because it was a very personal album, and these are things that she wanted to sing about.
Right, and in the lyrics, of course, they can be pretty raunchy. You just kind of have to accept that, I suppose, when you go into it. I can kind of just... I want to just gloss over these lyrics. I really do, because they are sort of...
crude?
I guess that's the word to describe it, yeah.
If the music is guttural, the lyrics are just crude, and that's a problem for me.
See, and I don't see it as a problem. I don't mind songs dripping with sex for sex sake. It doesn't bother me.
While Hunter had that tension, it was at least playful. This is just a little bit too on the nose.
Yeah. I'm going to give it this much. Hold on. I'm going to give it this much, though. It is kind of a self-aware track in some ways, because once it gets to the chorus, it starts out with, I could be the guy to treat you to a nice movie, feed you, but I don't want to mislead you. Tonight I want to be dirty girl, don't you want to get dirty girl? So then it goes right back into all the raunchiness. Yeah. But there's that self-awareness. He knows exactly where
what
he
he's
is.
Writing, yeah.
And
I like that about this song, that puts it a step above other, because he's very honest with himself.
Yeah. But the other song, sometimes that's just what guys want.
But that Beyonce song also, while there were issues, that one was also very honest. She was just being very honest for what she wanted, what she likes, and what she's looking for, It was very dirty, and it was very raunchy, but the
song was essentially how to pleasure her. That's about as graphic as it gets.
But it's also as honest as you can get, saying exactly what you like.
And that's why I'm making this comparison, because this is coming from the opposite standpoint. This is sort of what I'll do to you. But yeah, I don't want to go too deep into it, because at the same time, there's just... it's been done before.
Yeah.
It's been done to death, and I guess the shock value of the crudity does not impress me, really. What does impress me is the music beneath it. And there's another one of those eerie string transitions, or there's several transitions so far. So far, I think the bridges are probably bridges / interlude / transition. Again, it could appear in any form on this album.
Yeah.
But in either of those cases, where it completely pulls from the verse and the chorus, it tends to get very ethereal at certain times. And in this particular case, it goes down a whole different route. Coming from a soul perspective, this sort of string / electronica transition, it reminded me of the kind you'd get out of like late 1970s electronica. There's that synth there. We have strings overhead, right? Or, well, I guess you'd say strings beneath, because with the dominant instrument is really the synth. And the synth is the kind that you get out of like late 70s Vangelis. Very weird to expect that on this album. I wanted to think Daft Punk, but even Daft Punk really didn't even broach this. This predates Daft Punk. This is literally Vangelis territory. But it appears and then it's gone. But at least we're back to something that I was enjoying anyway. So I don't know. That's just how I'm sort of classifying these transitions here.
And that's actually what I was speaking to when we first started talking about this. The peripheral stuff, like the strings and the little more unusual synth work, some of the more unusual ideas in the guitars, seems to be the best part of these textures that we're getting here.
I agree, and I think that this album would have fared a lot better. I'm not saying there's nothing to look at in the content and the verse and the choruses, but,
yeah, but
if it really furthered some of the ideas in those transitions, or went into a new section that developed those ideas, yeah, then you'd really, really have something.
Yeah, it seems like the best parts are just being left out of the focal points.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm getting a lot of my issues. But we do get the best song on the album.
It's one of, for sure. So track 5 is Happy, the big single from the Despicable Me 2 soundtrack. This song, we don't really have a lot to say about this, because honestly, if you haven't heard this song by now, you're under a rock. You're absolutely, literally under a rock, because it's
That's why
everywhere.
I want to be careful with it being the best song. Of course, there are other gems in this album here, but this album is the most well-known.
But that's why I said it's one of the best songs.
One of the main reasons why I will say this is my favorite song is the vocals. The vocals are the best on the album. I love hearing him. This is a song that, to be frank, should have been too long for me, and I can't get enough of it. This is a part where I just want to keep hearing him repeat, "Get happy."
Well,
I just want to hear that over and over
again. The thing about Happy, and I think it speaks to what Steve was saying before, the real thing about Happy, and I think a lot of the tracks on this album, why I enjoy them, is they're very honest, and they are very personal. I do see the comparison to Beyonce's album, at least in the fact that this is Pharrell Williams being fairly face value. It's about him or his life or how great he has it. And Happy is just what the namesake says. It's a perfectly constructed pop song with tons of fun, because it's just about being happy and how great it feels to be happy and how things can't bring you down when you're this happy. And honestly, as someone who's been there recently and who's kind of really in a great place in his life, listening to a song like this is like, yeah, man, yeah, totally. Like, you really get into it. And it's hard to not enjoy an infectiously catchy song like this.
Well, it contrasts the previous track's vocals, the previous track's lyrics in a way, because that was so sort of indicative of the kind of lyrics that you do expect from pop tracks, right, that it is kind of nice to just pull all that back and say, you know what, why not something that everyone can relate to, that isn't going to offend anybody at all. Obviously, happiness, which is why, what is, who does Despicable Me? That's, Disney?
No, that was DreamWorks.
DreamWorks. I always get those two confused. Either way, obviously that's probably why they jumped on it, because it's it's ideal for a kid's medium.
Well, and also the thing about Happy is that it's just so honest, and happiness, the concept of happiness, is probably one of the most relatable emotions and ideas, because everyone has their own idea of happiness.
Don't tell that to a misanthrope.
Actually, no. Sadness may be the only thing that approaches the level of happiness.
I'm sure there's plenty of late 19th century philosophers who would really disagree with you, Matt.
But the point
being
is...
sad or being happy, though, I mean...
But in modern society, what I'm saying is that happiness is something that you can, if you look for it, can find happiness in whatever you want. Just about. Whether...
No, I'm sure if you played the song, like, in front of any of those, late 19th century philosophers, all life is pain, all life is misery. Yeah, they probably perk up.
Forget them.
They should have had Pharrell at their time.
Think of art. What are the two most iconic symbols of art?
I'm thinking of like Nietzsche specifically.
Not physical art, but like of theater.
No, I know.
Theater. It's the smiling mask. It's the sad mask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is what everything really comes down to.
Not like late 19th century, a little bit later, but Jean-Paul Sartre, he was another one. He was just miserable.
It's either positive or negative, and this is the pinnacle positive.
Yeah, he really could have used him.
Or approaching the pinnacle positive. A little reach.
So, there's not much else to say about Happy. I mean, it's a single. Go check it out. It's definitely worth hearing.
I love the harmonies. Yeah. That's my main thing in this track. That's really this...
I'm happy.
Well, also
it's the chorusing in the background that is very... Yeah.
Well, and I also love the breakdown in this, because even though it's a fairly repetitive, it's not a fairly innovative breakdown, it's again, so honest and so wonderful that you can't help but enjoy it,
Yep.
Moving on to track 6, we're halfway through the record now. Come Get It Bae.
Come Get It Bae.
A B-A-E. And this is featuring Miley Cyrus, the infamous, and I say infamous because she seems to have a lot of negative press these days, the infamous Miley Cyrus. This song was, really the thing that stand outish about the song is it had a really catchy southern R&B groove. And you know what, for all of the things that people hate or love about Miley Cyrus, I'm not particularly a huge fan myself. Her singing in this is good. It's nothing terrible. It's not revolutionary, but she's like every average 90s pop star. She sings okay.
Which is kind of unfortunate because she's about 15 years too late to be an average 90s pop star. I did not know what woman was singing with him during the song because, to be frank, she sounded like everybody else. So we're not going to just ignore her part in this. Yeah, you're getting a new level of a new palette of textures being used here, but this may be the most, not repetitive, but the most formulaic of all the songs. This song, after a while, I just wrote down what letter order was going on here, because I just wanted, it's a formula. It is a straight formula in this case, and it's bothersome because of that.
See, and I disagree that it's bothersome, because while it is formulaic, I was still engaged in this song. There's a song that comes towards the end of the album where it was so formulaic, I actually was bored. Here, I was entertained, and it still was a good dance song. It wasn't anything revolutionary, but this is at a moment on the album where we are leaning more towards good instead of great, for sure. At least on this track.
Well, yet again, I fall in the middle here. There's some things to say about to either end, but this is actually a very rhythmically complex track, almost to the extent that we had back in Brand New. And it has to do with the style, again. It sort of borrows from this sort of almost like a gospel/field song vibe, and we're going to get that again later in the album here, but it's like it's that rhythm that really drives it in that way. So I feel like there actually is an overarching style here because of how many times we sort of get that semi-Afro-Cuban beat here. And even if it's not rhythmically complex in the music itself, you get that sometimes with the vocals. Of course, I think none of us are really arguing that we prefer Pharrell singing here to Miley Cyrus, but it really is true. Anyone could have filled that particular position on this album as long as there was a duet, just put someone there. And we actually have that problem later, too, in the case of a duet. I feel like it doesn't really matter. It's not... You don't get anything that's indicative of the particular artist. No. Now, I personally am at a loss to really explain what I find indicative about Miley Cyrus' singing. It's like everything I said in the very beginning here about Pharrell. We could define him, we could identify him in a heartbeat. His signature falsetto, his style of songwriting and everything. It's very hard for me to kind of pick out and be like, yes, that's got Miley Cyrus's
she does tend to fall in.
I can't do it.
She does tend to fall in with a lot of the other young female singers as far as not having something that stands out about her voice.
And I'm going to argue that Williams' voice was really kind of just okay in this song as well. I feel like this one is one he was off his game.
I disagree.
No, that's why I was so focused on the rhythm that was just the rhythm, the entire rhythm throughout the song.
I thought that
I didn't hear anything, I didn't hear inflections or anything, I didn't hear anything in his vocals that was really kind of standoutish.
No, I thought the vocal work was pretty impressive. I think I went with again. It went with the rhythm in which he was singing. It was all about flow. In this
I think
track.
that you were so distracted by the blandness that you didn't see it because it was there. We both heard it.
Maybe it got lost in the rhythm.
I think that's what the problem was. Is maybe you just got kind of lost in the rhythm and how.
But this is the song where I actually, like I said, I wrote out the progression. This is the point of the album where I realized so much of the previous work is almost the same exact progression. And it's like he's got a formula for this with what he's doing for these dance songs, which is, dance songs are supposed to be able to do certain things. One is to get your feet moving. Two is to keep them moving. So yeah, if you find a formula that works, but the problem is that's not a very good thing, because I know plenty of dance songs or songs that you can dance to that don't have a formula like this. Or don't mix it up.
Like what, though? IDM, intelligent dance music? That's for a very specific, esoteric audience. I feel like general, populace, going to the club kind of thing. Not that I'm saying, like, club music is, like, high art or anything. It's obviously not. But then there is a middle ground, and I feel like this kind of goes in the higher end of that middle ground.
I agree with
It's doing something fairly inventive, I guess, with a dance formula.
I get it's not as complex as trance or techno or anything else, but it's not trying to be. It's trying to be pop dance music, and it's doing something a little more than most pop dance music does.
I would love for you to prove me wrong. I want you to name some dance, specifically dance music artists.
I'm not going to be able to name many people because it's primarily within the trance field.
But trance is separate. It's different.
You're
comparing apples and oranges. You are comparing apples and oranges. Pop dance music and trance are not the same. They're not.
No, there's pop trance music, pop electronica that is extremely similar to this.
Okay, but see, even then, there's drastically different extremes here. There's a good amount of trance music that I've heard, which is just bottom of the barrel, literally stuff that never changes. That would, talk about repetition.
I brought some on this show.
Yeah,
yes.
I think you did. That's right. I wouldn't even say I would call that trance, but maybe in a certain sense. I think you're talking about deep chord, right?
Yes, deep trance, dark trance.
Yeah, Somer, episode 70. Check it out. But the point is, there's both sides to either spectrum, and I think if you're talking about trance, I think the more extreme, rhythmically complex side of that spectrum probably broaches IDM. But that's the kind of stuff that you play at a rave. I mean, how many? That's one strata of the populace that goes to raves all the time. This obviously is not intended for that, and frankly, for the kind of music that I do see being played at more a more variety of venues. This could be played anywhere from a Sweet 16 party to just your average club anywhere, any city.
Yeah.
Well,
and it would have a pretty good effect.
General electronica has that same effect, and it's not constrained by any real formula.
To me, this is the same caliber as Get Lucky in many ways.
Well, I'm not saying Get Lucky is really the penultimate or anything like that, and yeah, it does have the same sort of formula, but you can't discredit just general electronica, because they do the same music styles, and DJs will spin these things together to use an electronica beat and these vocals, or so on and so forth. It happens constantly, remixing and things like that. Using electronica because of the complexity that you can get with that, because of the complexity that is put in that sort of music.
Well, it's clear at this point we're having sort of an aside based on sort of the album in broad here. Because I'm not sure where this really applies to this track, Come Get It Bae. I mean, it's a whole, because of that soul, that gospel element, I feel like this is for a whole nother side. This is, I wouldn't necessarily call this a dance track, but maybe this is more like a clap-along kind of thing. Same kind of thing that we got back in Brand New.
This is more of a critique on R&B and hip-hop dance music.
Yeah, well, I still thought the vocal work was pretty impressive here. I was impressed by the bass. That was another thing. Somewhere toward the end of this album, even if there's some tapering off in other areas, the bass work starts getting really incredible.
Yeah.
I did not look up the bassist, but it should be known. So,
And then we go on to another gem of mine, Gust of Wind.
So speaking of Get Lucky, Gust of Wind is featuring Daft Punk, which we figured would happen at some point on the record. It's got this really unique intro that Steve described as almost whirlwind-like. It's a very circular, but a progressive circular sound. It moves.
The word is spiral.
Spiral.
It spirals.
It spirals, yes. And it spirals...
I was going to say it meanders, but hey,
it's the
whatever
same
your pleasure,
idea.
man. That's the thing with the whirlwind. You picture like a hurricane, like the storms are coming, lock up your window, board up your windows, lock your doors, and it's coming through the town. You can see all the stuff moving. It's a very, very visual application for this particular sound, for this particular instrument. It's generally, of course, strings, which I am presuming it's Hans Zimmer again. But then again, we have another featured guest here on this album. That's, of course, Daft Punk. Daft Punk, and they may very well have done that strings in place.
I'm pretty sure
Hans
that
Zimmer.
I likely.
I don't know that.
Don't know for a fact, but likely Daft Punk mixed this track. Likely, because when you have Daft Punk on, they're not known for the singing, though they do sing, and they probably sing here.
But it's clear, based on their previous, based on Random Access Memories, episode 49, that they they were more ambitious. They went towards string stuff, so I know they can arrange.
So I'm pretty sure I'd be safely say that this is not Hans Zimmer. This is Daft Punk.
But the funny thing is that Hans Zimmer wasn't listed back in Marilyn Monroe.
Right.
He was sort of he was uncredited there, which means that he could be just a factor throughout.
But
it comes down to the fact that both of these individuals, Zimmer and Daft, are mixers. You really don't want too many,
And the point is, ultimately,
anyway.
Someone composed it, and it was great.
Yes.
Anyway, but what
to me, it was better than Marilyn Monroe. Much better than Marilyn Monroe.
Yes, but what I'm speaking to is that they probably did the production work and the mixing on the track, which is why I liked how it sounded. I thought it really moved in a way that really got me into it. I really got pulled in by the sound, the mix work that was done on this. I thought that the lyrics were okay. They weren't incredible by comparison to other songs.
I actually rather like the lyrics here, but hold on, let's go chronologically. We had the intro. Now as we go into the verse, we actually give way to something else. We give way to probably the funkiest piece on the entire album, the funkiest segment. Because those strings, they give way to the bass. And remember how I said the bass was getting better and better and better?
Yes.
This is the moment where the bass just takes off. And to hear it working in tandem with the strings like that is phenomenal. And this is why, to me personally, this is the gem. This is the gem of this album. This kind of beats Happy to me. Because this is pure substance. This track could definitely not be labeled as a dance song. I mean, it's possible you can, but again, not for every audience. This would be taking a turn on the dance floor, let's just say.
I love that bass. I thoroughly love the bass, and it's enticing. It wants you to come in and enjoy the song. And yeah, I think you can dance along to this.
You could definitely dance to this song.
I wouldn't see it being impossible by no stretch.
I can always dance to funk, personally. That's just me. In fact, it's one of the only mediums I will dance to.
I can easily see this played at an after party or at a dance party. I mean, it definitely fits the criteria. While I like the lyrics vocally and through the verse, I felt that the choruses were a little weaker. It's just because they brought in... It's either Daft Punk singing or Pharrell singing in a Daft Punk style with the technology spin on it. And I felt it didn't lend to the theme of the song as well as the verses did. It kind of fell short a little bit.
That's where
my biggest
That's where it doesn't beat Happy. It was that electronica voice, which I do love on Daft albums, but did not really enjoy in this song. Because it's.
I agree.
It's Williams.
I agree. It didn't fit the medium. Yeah. It really didn't. It
felt kind of shoehorned.
Yeah, and to be honest, it even feels shoehorned to me. I'm going to say it. It has even felt shoehorned even within Daft Punk's own work. A lot of times they will bring in that vocalization, and then it just kind of takes me away from the beat work they had otherwise created. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it needs to really, really be blended in here, and this time I just thought it was a massive departure from an otherwise, phenomenal track.
Yeah. And
also, the bass takes the cake.
The big thing is this actually... tries to break free of that formulaic nature that we were just, complaining about, and it does actually keep rearranging the way the movements are used, the way the sections are used, that I liked a lot more.
Well, it was more chordally complex, and even if that, at times, when I say chordally complex, it may very well have just gone into, 4 different chords. I don't recall at the top of my head, but it at least gives the illusion of there being more, because when you combine the aspect that you have, a track that has multiple chords at least, we're not just staying in one chord throughout, and we have had that up until now in many places because of the fact that that's probably the easiest thing to dance to. No chordal change, no change. You can keep the groove going, you don't lose the beat. But here there's more complexity in it. I personally like, especially in the dance medium, I love there to be texture popping off each other. And that's one thing that funk does outstandingly. And honestly, I think it's all sort of a lost art, the way in which strings interact with a bass, because it was kind of begun in the 70s. We got a whole lot of it out of the 70s. Probably one of the main places you'd realize would be like a Gene Page score to perhaps any blaxploitation film. But that's probably like the most common instance of it. But it was used in other places too, and it was used really, really phenomenally. It's just an amazing duality to have the really, really low end mixed with something that's fairly familiar, strings throughout the ages and everything. And here it was just brought back in a big way, because sometimes it's brought back and it's just kind of treated as a bit of a trope. It shouldn't be a trope. It's a wonderful combination, and it should be developed. Here it was.
And this song started a rise that ended quickly between this song and the next song. So Gust of Wind gave us something a little different, and so does Lost Queen, for a few reasons. Lost Queen track 8 is almost 8 minutes long. There's a reason for that, though. It really is 2 songs. There's a specific intermission point between the 2 songs, and we'll get to that.
I feel like I may have heard that the second track may indeed be called Freck, or Freak, as in RFEQ.
Yeah.
As in frequency.
In frequency, yeah. So, to start, Lost Queen, very much, the first song is I don't want to say cliche, but it's definitely it has a theme that we've come across very much in pop music. It's this idea of looking for love, and it really is a very romantic song. The lyrics are very much trying to finding this person and trying, like one of the lyrics is, where are you from? What planet are you from? This idea that someone you could fall in love with is otherworldly because they're so unique to you.
I mean, this could be just deja vu, but I seem to recall some albums, some artist, and some song that use the same lyrics, because it is, I mean, that's really a trope. I mean, what planet are you from, or you must be from a different planet because I've never seen any beauty like yours, to separate and single out your beauty amongst all the rest. It's commonly done, but, I do gotta say, at this point,
here.
It's sweet, and also, I don't care a lot of times what he's singing, because I care more how he's singing.
Yeah.
I love Pharrell's voice, and really, I get lost in that far more than I could ever get lost in the actual words.
It's a really awesome the way he's got sort of amazement in his voice when he's doing those verses, and it goes into a yearning sense in the choruses.
Yeah.
And it comes across very well, and
Well, that's right there when he says, I think you are a lost queen.
Yeah. And it's coupled with that more tribal orientation that we got back in Come Get It, Bae, which is a little bit different. There's the trope than what you were explaining. It's a little bit different that way.
Yeah, it's got that island groove that really makes it stand apart a bit. I mean, it still falls into the cliches a bit of a pop song, but it's still interesting enough that, you go along for the ride, I feel, anyway.
It's
personally.
sort of like it's someone great coming on upon your, kind of secluded society, almost looking as not just a queen, but almost godlike. A being greater than what was already here.
Well, remember when I noted...
It does a great job of doing that.
Remember when I noted earlier on that there was a sort of a gospel/field song aspect, song earlier on. This is really the follow-up. This is the one that takes that to the whole new level, because this time you actually have the background singers. You have that depth, that baritone a cappella in the background, which is it's used as a backbeat. It's sort of just this sort of doo-wop kind of thing that you get throughout the entire track, or at least this first half here. And this was probably one of the most drastic genre shifts, I think, on the album. At the same time, I don't know. Maybe that's what hurt it a little bit for me. I wasn't feeling this 100% because it still fell back in the same exact. It's gonna be repetitive throughout, and also it wasn't so much in the dance medium, so I'm not 100% sure how it fits there. But at least it fits into the theme aspect, and the theme aspect is, of course, that search for the lost queen. Which is nice imagery in itself. The idea of portraying a girl as a lost queen, someone who you were just positive must have been something, of an object of beauty in some other time, but here you're out to make sure they will be again. It's sweet. It's a very sweet image, but...
And that image...
Musically, it's separate from the album, for me.
It's separate when it gets that wave crashing...
So yeah, there's an interlude in the middle that's literally a soundbite of waves crashing. Very relaxing, actually. I remember listening to it at work and just being like, oh, peaceful, I like this. It goes on for about, I think, 30 or 40 seconds, maybe a little longer.
And it's really the interlude. I mean, it's not even an interlude. This is sort of the transition.
It's an intermission.
Between these two different tracks. Again, This is not common, but it's sort of like this secondary song, Freak, Freck, whatever, is like a bonus track, because it's not really listed anywhere, but it obviously couldn't conceivably be related to Lost Queen. It's hard to imagine it, at least in a musical sense.
And so the second half of this track is this separate song, dealing more with... it's more leaning towards a sexuality than a sweetness.
It is dripping with sex. Not in the way I had... not the issues I had with Gush. It was more along the lines of Hunter.
It was more romanticized sex, but it was still sexual. It was very sexual.
Let's just read it out. You gotta go inward to experience the outer space that was built for you. You gotta go inward. Just picture the love, it's picking you up. Your temple should buzz from the vibration of love. You'd see I'd rather be a freck, see there it is, a freck, than not be a freak, I guess, than not be unique. It has to be freak in that case because of the rhyme. Individuality makes life better. See, I'd rather be a freak than not be unique. The individuality makes life better. So, yeah, I guess... I'm trying to conceive of a way in which it could be related to Lost Queen.
I actually have a way. So the idea that when you find a true love that you really care for and someone that you are in love with, it's this idea of being comfortable with someone sexually to explore new universes. Whether it and speaking very frankly, whether it's experimentation, whether it's using toys, whether it's doing whatever. It's this seriously. It's this idea of expanding your universe sexually when you're in love, and the idea that he found this lost queen, holds her up to this standard and this pedestal, and then also sexually thinks that she's otherworldly as well.
This is coming from me, and that's a little bit of a stretch, but I see where you're going with it. It sort of plays up the amazement, in my opinion, the amazement idea of the first half of Lost Queen in the second half, but turns it on its head, and now they're being amazing together instead of a more solo idea. But that's even stretching it for me.
Well, let's just say this. I think there's any number of ways you could conceivably have placed another track after Lost Queen, because I'm sure you're right, at least in the sense that it's tying together the individuality aspect. I think if we're going to have like an arc here for this album, that's really what it is, which probably hints to the title being separate letters. G-I-R-L. Every girl unique, every girl unto herself, no comparisons, no objectifying, no lumping into any kind of box.
I would agree, and I think
that's really what this goes for. It's just these two halves of the track do it in two different ways. When we go to Lost Queen, that's a very traditional way, I think, of that. That's been done. You would see that in going back to like 15th century logbooks. You would see, or Shakespearean sonnets. There's always been that attempt to sort of like attribute royalty to your object of beauty, but then. The second we move to this is a little bit more modern. I especially see that now. I feel kind of foolish that I was calling it Freck. Of course, it's Freak. It's just odd the way it's spelled, and I think that's just purely for the rhyme with unique. So you see, I'd rather be a freak than not be unique, which I think I'm not sure. Of course, there's sexual imagery here. But that in itself could just easily be applied to the girl in question.
Yeah, sure.
It's also the way the actual beat, everything says it. Yeah. The way he's singing says sex.
Individuality makes life better, and that's just it. It's that the girl, it doesn't matter how freaky she is, in one way or another, whether it's sexually. You mentioned it could be sexually, but of course it could be absolutely any way. And that's just it. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
What's more important is that it's unique. It's something different that you can't find anywhere else in the world.
Right.
Which is why I would count it alongside Hunter. It has multiple layers to it.
And it's also very strongly attached to the overarching theme in the album. I said that this was the beginning and end of A Small Rise because these two tracks were, I felt, very enjoyable, interactive, and unique.
And also the other thing about that, the end track, is just from the musical standpoint, this was one of my favorite points in the album. I actually enjoyed it just about as much as I did Gust of Wind, maybe even a little bit more so, because of the build-up. You know, this is the kind of thing, based on the use of that water interlude, this is the kind of thing that I wanted from earlier tracks.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you can't expect that to the same degree in tracks that actually are one singular entity. But when you have transitions, when you have interludes, you at least want a new section, or you want something that develops the song a bit. Well, this went in the completely opposite direction and didn't just develop; it went to a whole new song. But that's, from a showmanship standpoint, that really places emphasis on it. You get some chills running down your spine when it finally comes. It was so drastically different from the Field song that, I was loving it. It was one of the highlights of the album for me.
But then we move on to Know Who You Are, featuring Alicia Keys. Now, my biggest gripe with this song, among other things, is at least up until this point, I was entertained. Even if the songs were a little repetitive, or, I didn't like parts of the vocal work or something else, whatever we've talked about so far, I was still engaged. But by track 9, first of all, I see the name Alicia Keys, and Alicia Keys is a phenomenal artist. She does great work. And
beautiful voice.
And when you put someone with such a beautiful voice with Pharrell, who also has a beautiful voice, and all they do is sing a mundane, bland pop hit, it's like, why? Like, you have Alicia Keys, a great pianist and singer, and this is what you do a bland, straightforward kind of romance pop song. It's not bad.
Honestly, they should have been doing a duet of back in the album Mark III, Hatch Fever, when Hatchworth shows up and does that beautiful belting note. Both of them can do that note. Pharrell and Keys can both do that note.
Mark III, episode 72.
We're just saying that there should have been...
Why didn't they do that note?
There should be more creativity in this song. There's really actually not a lot to talk about.
Well, I think it had to do, again, with framework. It's a reggae song. This, again, we're moving in a different genre direction here. That's more of like the backbeat against. Whether the vocal flow is really in a reggae sense is kind of debatable. But maybe it's just not a medium that really fit Alicia Keys. I don't personally know any reggae songs that she's done. I could be wrong. She's a diverse artist. But, yeah, it's... The reason it existed here, the reason I think you had to have some form of guest is, of course, to have the duality. It's a duet, or not an immediate duet, but first you have to have the male, then you have to have the female. And they're both singing things that are somewhat analogous. Both their sort of separate stories. In verse 1, Pharrell sings, "Bad day at work, crazy boss, crazy or worse. Finger pointing, but they depend on you. Inhale, exhale, like a seal. No, oh yes, smile, honey, no stress." And then, just for comparison's sake, we go to Alicia Keys' verse. "I want every woman to make a pledge with me. Say your name, to live life on the edge. I want you to know I see the power is in me. No more acquiescence. Standing up with no stress. Again, I will do what I need till every woman on earth is free." A lot bolder.
Well, yeah, also for me, the lyrics weren't bad. The message in the lyrics I really like.
The inflection, the delivery was just lacking.
It just gets lost, yeah. It's lyrically, it's actually a really good song. It's just, it gets lost in the performance of it, honestly.
And it's kind of... The actual rhythm that's going on here kind of goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then seems to settle... And I really don't like where it settles by the time it actually gets up to Alicia's part.
Yeah, it's just...
It gets really safe.
Yeah, it's very safe. There's not much to talk about for that reason, I think, is because it's really safe.
I still like the bass work. Honestly, that was one thing that I can still highlight throughout almost the remainder of this album. The bassist is just on fire.
But one thing is not enough to carry the tail end of an album.
No, I agree, and also the way it ended, I think there was a little bit a case of overlayering in this particular case, because of course, after you have them tell their individual stories, then we give way to the duet, right? But then it's sort of just a big outro. It's this long outro where they're just sort of overlaying each other, one after the other, after the other, after the other. It's a little bit busy. It's clearly just one of those, sort of dramatic closeouts.
And speaking of dramatic closeouts or anything but, track 10, It Girl, is the final track on the album. And my biggest disappointment with this closer is that, okay, it's Pharrell Williams. You expect some kind of punctuation. It doesn't have to be transformative or completely unique. I would have taken another song like Brand New even. But this also just was very formulaic and very much that pop structure. And after getting the songs we'd gotten previously, I just wanted something a little different. It was still groovy, but it didn't really go anywhere. And then the track, I'm skipping to the end, but we'll go back, but the track just fades out. There's no punctuation at all. It just kind of fades out. And the tail end minute of the song is completely repetitive instrumental.
It's It Girl. That's the title. All right? You want... deliver something on that. Because there's a certain level of imagery that goes along with the idea of It Girl.
The woman.
Most of it is a lot of expectation.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And it just seems to just keep circling the drain in this case. It's going around and around and around doing the same things that I was nitpicking in the previous songs, but kind of all at once. The lyrics weren't really too inventive. His vocals were just okay. I mean, they're real good compared to a lot of other people, but they're just okay here. The beat is stagnant. It doesn't do anything. I don't know, Steve, was the bassist good?
Yeah, I kind of didn't notice at this point. I was kind of...
Nah, I really didn't notice it at this particular moment.
Okay, so we lost that too.
If it was there, it wasn't as impression...
it was still a good groove, but again, I've kind of accepted that throughout this album at this point.
Well, that's what I said. Well, even the worst stuff is not bad. It's just not as standoutish as the good stuff.
I'm going to use that word again. I would say it's ubiquitously groovy. At least for the sake of the album and the medium. It's like, if you don't have that, well, you got nothing. But as long as you have that, that's at least one thing. But that's your base level.
I feel, I definitely agree.
Yeah, I really did want some substance here, considering the title, It Girl. But it turned out to be a jam-out, fade-out, which was kind of what we already got in the previous track. That's how the previous track ended. We didn't need a whole nother track to do it. I don't know. I consider the substance to be filler until those gorgeous interludes. That's the funny thing about this album. And yet I didn't even see that on this track here. It was just very odd to have an entire track being a fade out. It seemed counterpoint to what this album was going for.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was the biggest thing that disappointed me about the final track.
It's, instead of leaving it with an exclamation point that they've been building up to, it was an ellipsis.
Yeah. I wanted to read a little bit of lyrics here. That's what I was trying to look at, because, again, you'd see whether It Girl at least is followed through with the lyrics. You the It Girl, hey, my inspiration, my compass spinning, baby, it's the right destination. Come on, tell me what I came for. I got treasure to hide, so let's keep it from the strangers. Your waves, they wash over me. Your tides, they pull me back to sea. When you bite on my lip and hold my hand and moan again. And then it goes into, I'ma hold that ass. It's so contrary to It Girl. Yeah. It seems like this should really be taking the sweeter approach.
Well, and also
it's kind of mixing it. I think really that's what he's going for. He's going for the mixed bag here. Mix the sexual with the
sweet.
With the sweet. And as far as he's concerned, there should be no separator, no line whatsoever. Which works in instances, not in every case.
Well, lyrically, I get what he's going for. It didn't impact me the same way, because I believe that you can mix the sweet and the sexy.
It did. Obviously, that's what we all hope for, But I don't know. Maybe in the medium of lyrical work, I feel like that sort of needs to be stressed as to when there's one thing, when there's another, when one ends, when one begins. When you just sort of list it in commas, I see the statement he's making. But it's a little odd.
Well, I think that's the problem, too, is lyrically it wasn't stated as strongly. Lyrically, he sings it kind of ubiquitously instead of... If there was a separation in style from the verse to the chorus, I could see that. Get a little down and dirty with the beat for the parts where he's singing about "I'm going to grab that ass." Like, do something with it. Make the separation, but blend it somehow.
He didn't go. It's that mixed bag and the lack of going full force one way or the other. Because if you think of some like really iconic ideas, and while I actually am not a big fan of the play, but the soliloquy with Romeo and Juliet, where 'tis the east and Juliet is the sun. Just that line right there personifies the idea of it's not just the East and she is the sun. It is the East because she is the sun, because of the way he lights up this world. That's just going, pardon, the vernacular, balls deep. That's going real heavy. That's sweet. That's beautiful. That's that gorgeous flower that she represents to me. On the other side, I mean, you can get real down and dirty and, let's do it like the Discovery Channel. Like, that really that's the other side of that coin. He kind of goes wishy-washy between the two.
But I still feel like you can do both, but you have to do something with both.
That's the whole thing it's wishy-washy. He doesn't go one way or the other.
Yeah.
Now, there was even earlier moments, even when the music, I feel like the line "go all or go home" could really be applied to many of these cases.
Yeah.
It's a shame, though, and this is why we're going to probably go into dance music later on, because as far as the dance floor is concerned, people don't focus on these things a lot. People don't focus on lyrics for sure on the dance floor. You have to be a pretty crazy multitasker or a really odd individual to start, really honing in on that stuff. Unless it's just the bare minimum, like the chorus, the chant, exactly.
Well, when listening to dance music and dancing, it's more about singing the lyrics that you can sing along to while you dance, and it's not going to be something super complex, obviously.
But that's the thing. I feel like, at least on the musical front, at least on the beatwork front, it succeeds. It's still danceable, probably front to back. Not every single track here is my taste, and some tracks even exceed my taste in terms of what I would like to dance to, or what I expect from dance music. So it's a really tricky case. I guess I'll head into my wrap up here.
Go for it. Let's start us off.
Oh, I really respect what he does. I respect what he does as an artist, and I kind of just honor his vocal work. That's another thing that I think is kind of separate here. I was saying that the music is separate from the lyrics, but also the vocals are separate from the lyrics. I know that's odd. It seems counterintuitive, but because vocals are the lyrics or lyrics are the vocals, but really they're not. I frequently make a habit of tuning out lyrics when I'm so enraptured by the melodies, and there are still several melodies here on this album that are very, very strong. They're enhanced for sure when the music is equally as strong, but that's actually the one element I think throughout which never fails, is the vocals. Front to back, he's still got it. He has what I like to call sort of a smoky falsetto. Probably the only artist I could even think of using that descriptor for. And it's still just as powerful. In many ways, it sounds even maturer than it did back with, Fly or Die. Maybe he's lost a little bit of the belting factor. I feel like that's a little bit curtailed, maybe from years of touring or whatnot. I did notice some weakness there on this album, but still the resonance has it in every single case. But if you're talking about groundbreaking tracks that are really like going to move it forward and move his style forward, you're really looking at just kind of Gust of Wind easily, and the part B, the Freak of Lost Queen. That part B, and maybe even to a certain extent earlier on, what was it, Gush, at least in the musical front, if not the lyrical front. But those are your big tracks here. And then you sort of have a different side. Because what I just stated are the tracks that are actually moving along music, like really pushing this album to its fringes. But then you have the other side. You have Happy, which is, granted it's not groundbreaking, but it's a track that is tailor-made to be popular, and there's something said for that awareness, that awareness of your audience and how something will sell. I got to give it the pop cred for that, because there's plenty of worse pop out there. I would love for Pharrell to be the sole owner of the pop industry, or to basically guide it up and down, because everything he touches seems to find its way to the top for good reason. And then there's just a few holes here, and those holes are basically the dance basics. Those are the tracks that you'd find on any dance album anywhere, and they're they're here. The fact that they're under Pharrell's name is sort of, shrug, whatever. At least they're danceable. But they don't go anywhere. So that's how you wind up with a pretty mixed bag here. Obviously, I'll be looking toward the former, the fringes. But you can't expect it, especially not in a dance album. I think this is a solid 4. It's just a 4 through and through, because I know its popularity, and I know what it could be, but it doesn't get to those upper stages, especially considering the arc kind of wanes in and out in certain moments. But I really do like what he was going for, especially considering it's an important message, even within feminist themed music. It's an important message, and even in a unique message within that, to identify girls as individuals rather than just promoting, which has already been done. This is an individuality album. It succeeds on that front. It's just solid all around 4. That's your mark of good.
The theme is really what keeps it high up there for me, and I'll say that it's only as high because of that idea of paying homage to womankind, which is what he's doing here. Even with the hiccups in some of the lyrical work, it really is, I love women, and here's the reasons why. This is the reasons why you should love women. That's great. Problem is, I just think because of the constraints, the dance idea is doing to this album is what really drags it down. Everything's infectious beat-wise, but that's what dance music has to be first and foremost. Everything after that is what sets it apart, and there's just so little after that sets it apart for me. A little bit of layering awesomeness here, a little bit of vocal work or lyrical work there. There's just it's very formulaic. It's very safe. I just can't really count it very high. So this is a 3.25 for me. I can't find anything in here specifically besides Hunter, Almost Great, Happy. That's it. Happy and Gust of the Wind, the only 2 real great songs, and even that, they're barely above 4s themselves.
You didn't feel the groove.
I didn't feel I felt
you felt the groove, and that's it.
And that's why it started at like a 3, but there was just so little afterwards.
Girl is an album for me by Pharrell Williams that, as far as things I want to dance to, like, we got really great pop music from St. Vincent a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And I really still believe that St. Vincent is the progenitor of future pop. I think she did a lot of great stuff. And actually, the idea of St. Vincent someday working with Pharrell Williams kind of gives me a stiffy. A little bit. Because I think they would do great work together. But that said, this is
It'd be an odd combo.
But he's teamed with odd others, and I think it could work.
Yeah, maybe.
But anyway, fantasies aside, Pharrell Williams is an artist that I've always respected and enjoyed. And I said on several occasions, I see him going... He's going to fulfill a potential I think that Michael Jackson would have had if not for the drama that he endured and went through and caused. Pharrell Williams is a brilliant artist who knows how to produce a track. He knows how to bring out the good in other artists as well as in himself. There are tracks here, though, where it does fall to cliches that we've seen in dance music before. That said, I also haven't heard a fun dance album in a long time. Like, for me, that I really got into. I mean, we're talking 90s La Bouche. Is the last time I remember a dance album that was just kind of mainstream, but entertaining and something I really like dancing to. That was everywhere. Pharrell Williams really has that capacity to be everywhere, and he's proven that. While Happy is still one of my favorite tracks, mostly for personal reasons, it's just infectious and fun, and that's it. When I really want to be entertained, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for substance too, but also there are moments where I'm just looking to be entertained, and there's a lot of that on this record. I agree that songs like Gush and songs like Gust of Wind really do take it to another level, or even all of, I would say, Lost Queen. I don't think it's just parts of Lost Queen. I think it's all of Lost Queen. I really see what he's going for, and I think he's going to continue to grow and expand. I'm pretty much in the same neighborhood as Steve. It doesn't hit a 5. It falls fatal to some cliches, but it's definitely a solid 4 for me. It's above average for sure. I would choose this over most of the pop music that's out there. I really enjoy it. I'm entertained by it. I groove by it. And being at a party last night where I was dancing for quite a bit of time, if he put on any of these tracks, just about, I think I would have been able to dance to them, with exceptions here and there.
I think also it's appropriate considering where it rates with the Daft Punk album that we did, which is probably the closest in style, or at least in intent, because Daft Punk always intended to be featured in dance halls and clubs and whatnot, and that was rated a little bit higher to this because of the deeper element, like the Giorgio of Mordor type vein, where they really get personal. But in general, there was still a lot of the same stuff. They just went a little further with it, and I think I rated that just a little bit above 4. But in many ways, I still had some of the same problems with that album. Yeah. It fell short. It wasn't everything it made out to be. But again, it comes down to danceability in the end. I think this album knows what it is. I'm sticking this time.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with Steve. I really like it, and I think that he has potential to do more, and he showed us a smidgen of that here. But he's definitely a talent, and that's undeniable. And we'll see where he goes with it. I think that with dance music especially, you can fall prey to personal taste more than other works. Because ultimately, it's got to get you moving. If it doesn't get you moving, it's not a good dance record.
And I think
that's part of the problem that John fell with it, and it makes sense. If it doesn't get you moving or entertained, it fails to be a good dance album.
And everyone knows 4, 5, and higher is really where we hold like the upper echelon stuff, the stuff that really breaks the mold. And the only instance that the only case where I can imagine this album doing such a thing is if he followed through on, I think, his time tested. It's odd that I would say this in this case, that you go back to something that's time tested to break the mold. But the funny thing is, I think his style, when he wanes from it, there's a struggle to find out exactly where he is. But yet when he goes with his style, the style that I noted back with Fly or Die, that's the kind of stuff that I think is going to get him further along. He just needs to go further and further with it.
And then my final thought is that I agree that theme of girl and how important women are to society and how they are individuals really is what kept it at a 4 for me. Overall, listen to it. I mean, if you like dance music, don't miss this one. It's enjoyable. There's enjoyable moments, and it's worth listening to. The hardcore dance fans might want to buy it, but, I say it's definitely worth hearing at least. Speaking of listening to dance music, though, I felt like this was a good time to actually broach, which we've touched on, but this kind of overarching progression of dance music and how it's changed over the years. I mean, you think about what people danced to in the 50s and 60s, 70s, it was more basic. It was, there was a lot. It was about having a good bass line always. It's got to be something you can dance to. But, you look at swing.
No. You're talking about what white people could dance to. Because let's be honest, it wasn't until the 60s or 70s that dance music became a descriptor for a genre of music instead of just multiple genres of music.
Yeah. That's
because
true.
There's a lot more interaction with nowadays. And if you're talking something like swing was a very specific kind of dance. Nowadays, it's a lot more open in what we would consider just dance.
Now it is. Right now, it is. You're 100% right. That's a funny thing, though. Dance music in its origins has a tendency to be a very stubborn genre because it's so intertwined with culture. It's all about, what you grew up with. That's the kind of stuff that probably is going to put you in the groove. Because groove is something that is really, really difficult to define. I mean, that's the best way I could put it, just groove. It's something that really is going to get you moving on a fundamental level. That's what dance music has to be. And for a more prim and proper, let's say, classical type audience, that could be a waltz, Yeah. But it really depends from person to person. There's just some things that are going to fundamentally turn off people and then attract others, which makes it a tricky genre, I think. Which is why it's amazing that modern dance music has become so universal, so worldly. And that's why, of course, it goes toward electronica, because nothing is as worldly as electronica.
I would say, though, I do have an argument about the aside and what we're leading up to here, like what really is like deeper dance music, I guess might be the way to put it, but it's not a very nice way to put it. And I think that to be frank, Spain and Portugal have given us the best possible things when it comes to dance. Just the origins, when you start talking about in Spanish music and then in Central and South American music, and its influences on what the dance scene is nowadays, because their music was always for dance.
Well, there's a pretty interesting history there, and it has to do, I think, with the amount of cultures that they sort of picked up upon. And of course, it has to do, the fact that from Spain, which had a lot of sort of North African influence back in like medieval times, and then, of course, by the time colonization comes, they come across here, and then it sort of fuses with us native rhythms, and then, of course, slavery is about the only thing we can kind of get from that on the positive front, is at least it was an introduction of African music, which may otherwise never have been introduced, which is probably the origin of jazz and all that other stuff. But that's why I was using the term Afro-Cuban a lot today, is because that's where we get that. A lot of that stuff developed in the Caribbean.
And that's where I'll point that modern day dance music draws its major depth from, because when you think back to the 90s and 2000s, what you can really start pigeonholing modern, I guess, dance music, think of like Enrique or Shakira and how like infectious their music was dance-wise. Yet you look at someone like Shakira, she still had a lot of depth in her actual chordal progression. She had a lot of depth in her choice of instrumentation, and it still was the major components of lyrical work as well.
But see, I would argue, well, even just in comparison to today's work, that it's still about the same level of complexity as some of the tracks on this album. Like, I'm thinking, of course, the My Hips Don't Lie, which is, the number one Shakira song. And that track, in terms of chordal progression, it's still very simple. Most of it is along the 4-chord progression line. It shifts in certain areas. But it's just a different texture, which is why I think a lot of dance music is all more about fooling people than it is about really lowering them in. It's sort of providing enough texture to get you moving, enough to make you move in one way or another. The highs are going to do different things to you than the lows, obviously, but that's how you create variety within the genre. If you were to really advance chordal progressions, if you were to really take that, far and beyond into the composition realm, I'm telling you, you would definitely lose people, because there comes a certain point where your brain just doesn't want to work on the dance floor. It will work to a point. And definitely IDM people, intelligent dance music people, would argue that it will continue to work. And believe me, I would love to get into a little bit of IDM music just to see what it's all about. I'm not fluid in the genre.
See, I would argue, though, that your brain turns off when you're dancing. Just because, there are so many types of dance that are taught, and most of them, John is right, is very heavily influenced by
I'm talking about loose, free dance, like, never taken a class in your life kind of thing.
Well, then that's fine. Well, I'm moving on to... So I have a friend who's a dance teacher, Linda. She runs a dance school in Staten Island. And whenever she's talking about the classes, it's always hip-hop, modern, or salsa.
Yep.
Stuff like that. Merengue. All these different styles. And they're all... The funny thing about dance styles is, while they are so different, they also have similarities. They a lot of them are very rhythm driven, or a lot of them are very beat driven. Like there's something for you to step with that keeps you in sync with the music, and that's what a lot of it is dependent on. When you're learning a professional dance or something that's very fine tuned, it's about keeping rhythm and keeping in step.
Yeah, and these things, they have a tradition attached to it, which is why there is sort of a specific thing there. And I remember that I had a few Puerto Rican friends that tried to teach me salsa, and of course there's a really set method. It's something that was carried down. It's not the kind of thing that you can. There's less impromptu, I think, for the average person with cases like that, because they are so set. But of course, I started just talking about dance music that is for anybody, or dance music that you at least would hope to gain as wide of an audience as possible.
Right.
That's really tough to do with salsa, or at least. If you are going to do it, then you need to kind of extrapolate and merge, salsa or merengue with other types of more familiar, more popular things.
Which is why I actually spoke of the late 90s, early 2000s, when that became a thing. That it really, even in early 90s, where salsa and Hispanic influences really started hitting pop heavy, like really heavy. Think of...
Because you had artists at the time like Enrique Iglesias, Mark Anthony, Shakira, who'd been putting out records before that, but they really broke big. Jennifer Lopez. Yeah, sure. Like, all of these people broke out really big within the mid to late 90s.
And every single one of their songs
were hits. Hit after hit after hit after
hit. They are, for the most part, not every song, but obviously, but most part, they're dance music.
But I have a point to bring us back to, because we're kind of meandering in a circle, which is fine enough. But when talking about dance music, we're talking about very specific parts of dance. But we're forgetting the thing that I think John brought up at the beginning, which I do want to talk about also, is how this dance is really a super genre. There's really
of course,
just specific dance music is still made up of many component parts, and I think that's what's really fascinating to me about dance music over other genres or even super genres, is that it's evolved in such different ways that take salsa on one end and then IDM on the other, and they're so distant from each other and yet have similarities even in their beat work. If you look for it.
Well, there's a circular nature to this. Anyway, that's why it's funny that you said we're having a circular conversation, because even just what I was saying before, and what John was saying also about salsa, being reintroduced to pop music. Like, if you follow the history of it, well, technically there was a pattern there. It comes full circle, because salsa and Afro-Cuban stuff gave birth to jazz. Jazz gave birth to rock and roll. Rock and roll gave birth to what we perceive as modern pop, which then all of a sudden decides to dip back into good old-fashioned salsa to reinvent itself, because by then there's kind of, a 6 degrees of separation.
Which is what I meant by a circular conversation, is that it's rapping.
A circular, that's the nature of genre shifting.
And there's also the idea that, well, all music was really meant to be danced to. All music. Even the stuff that you don't think you could dance to, they probably could if you really wanted to. When you start talking about the origins of music itself, it was meant to keep a beat, whether it was to pray, whether it was to do a ceremony, or whether it was to do something. But iconically, it was always...
But it very quickly grew different roles.
Yes, but even so, like, there was always some sort of visual aspect with it. Even the kind of hoity-toity, boring... medieval setting kind of a thing, like what a king would listen to. A lot of it would be like either not just dance, but gesticulation oriented. There's always a visual element built on the bones of music itself. No,
you're right. There's a lot of the same way I described that. There's a set pattern to salsa, within the way in which you move your foot back, and then but there's a pattern. I was trying to teach it once, it never took. But then medieval music had relatively the same thing, in which the members on the floor would sort of go around each other, establish lines and everything. And the music had to be kind of intertwined with that.
Well, and also keep in mind, John's right too, because even when we look where rock and roll evolved into, things like thrash metal and metal in general, the idea of moshing and mosh pits it at its core is a form of dancing. It really is. It's a way to move to the music.
It's That's not true. Ballet, where it actually has set ways to express
But the idea
yourself,
of when you're moshing, a good mosh pit is not about punching someone in the head. That happens as a result of a bad mosh pit. A good mosh pit started from, the idea of skanking and dancing in place, and then even thrashing and swinging your arms in place, but it's still a form of dance. And what's fascinating is that every culture, I feel, and every type of music has tried to find a way, if the songs require it, to dance.
You're almost describing a chicken and the egg situation, because in the case of punk, which was punk intended for dancing, or did the dancing did that really develop that form of punk? And did that develop that sort of heavy style music that was conducive to moshing?
And that's what I'm bringing up. And there's no yes or right or wrong answer. It could be either, and that's what I think is so interesting about it, is as music evolves over the years, and what I'm essentially getting at overall is, as dance music has evolved over the years, this idea of dance can really branch out to almost anything. Dance music is one of the largest branching supergenres, I feel.
Well, there's also that I feel like, just from a personal front, I might say that the music came first in this particular instance. I mean, John, you're making the claim, of course, you're going back to, the birth of music as it is. Where, they probably had a ceremonial origin. But many genres, of course, have begun without the intention of dancing being a thing. It was probably just written to be written because that's what the artist wanted to get at. And I think that's probably true with punk. It's just so happened that once that music was out there, it had that moshing nature to it. So then, then it's just sort of a feedback loop.
But that's the whole thing. If there's a rhythm, you can move to it. truly rhythmless music.
Yeah, it's got a beat and I can dance to it.
That's all. But that is true. You can at least sway to it. Or tap your head, or tap your feet. And that is the beginning of any dance.
Well, no, actually, no, you make a good point, because in that case, it actually does start with the musician himself, because, of course, the musician needs to get into the groove to even write it in the first place. Yeah. And most musicians will have some form of kind of grooving to their own instrument. Even as a piano player, you really kind of have to get into it in order to feel it, to actually make it quality. If you're stiff up there, then it's not gonna be impactful.
And also the idea that, like, even with slow songs, the most danced to songs at weddings, especially for first dances and this and that, are those slow, romantic, beautiful songs that have a dance to their own. You don't need a fast song to be able to be danceable. Some slow songs have wonderfully gorgeous dancing as well.
Well, it's said that most waltzes tend to be because of just the simple 1 2 3 1 2 3 nature, and of course waltz, you can still find that in almost every single genre today, or some form of that 3/4 time. Most of them have dancing in mind.
Yeah.
Most, not all, but most.
Well, what I like is when you find dancing within a song that you wouldn't typically dance to. Like, I had a friend who, at his wedding, his first dance with his wife was to Nothing Else Matters by Metallica, a metal band. But that song is very beautiful and slow and finely crafted, and they found a dancing rhythm in it that was really great for a beautiful slow dance. Which is interesting to me, because that's not a band that one typically dances to. Yet, this song was really good for that.
There's flailing to it, and there is raising and bobbing of heads and arms.
Wow.
And I think that's
for the choreographers to take after that, as to what they choose to sort of reinvent the actual motion there.
Yeah.
And
they're pushing the boundaries on that front.
And that's where I'm driving the conversation, is choreography.
That's interpretation.
Yeah. The interpretation a choreographer has for music is really the truest thing to music. Is when you want dance, it takes a good choreography to really pursue and show that dance.
Even an MC could be considered that.
Yeah, and that's actually why when you start talking about things like ballet, the choreographer becomes a lot of times more important than the actual dancers, because it's their projection of their vision of anything from as iconic as like Swan Lake onward into the actual piece itself. Really, they're just trying to find people that can live up to their dream of what this song can represent, this piece can represent.
And boy, do I have an anecdote for that, which is going to raise the exact problems that can lie within that. Biggest example, Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. He wrote The Rite of Spring. Of course, anyone might know that as being the featured and the dinosaur segment of the original Fantasia. The idea behind Rite of Spring, that Stravinsky wrote it for, was to be sort of like a pagan ritual. The whole entire ballet would be this sort of Celtic welcoming of springtime, right? The rite of spring idea. And now, of course, it was a very complex piece, and frankly, the way in which we've interpreted it growing up with Fantasia over the years, dinosaurs, the development of life, the birth of Earth, and the death of the dinosaurs probably comes to mind to me much more than any kind of Celtic ritual. Sure. But you have to accept that was the idea at the time. And then beyond that, it wasn't just a piece of music, it was a ballet. The visual element was not what we knew as Fantasia, as an animation. It was dancers coming on stage, ballet dancers, to actually perform this ritual in a very grand way. And there was this Nijinsky was the name of was the primary choreographer for the time. This is the early day. This is Tsarist Russia here, and there was a very rich tradition of ballet. They basically owned the medium at that time, and Nijinsky was one of the premier choreographers for the time. And he went out to do this really bizarre choreography that may or may not have really matched up with the music. We'll never know. To be fair, though, it's really hard to match up with anything like the Rite of Spring. Rite of Spring is probably one of the most complex pieces ever written. Literally one of the most complex. And yet, it was intended to be danced to. That is contrary to everything we've been saying today, considering that, we say, you kind of got to be constrained within the dance community, but ballet dancers would do bizarre things, and guess what? It flopped. Because no one was able to get into it. They weren't able to take the music for the music because they were forced to see the dancing that was being done to the music, and they couldn't accept it. there was something off there that people literally walked out halfway through the show and said, this is just too bizarre. And, you know, it was that classic interplay between composer and choreographer, where the composer blames Nijinsky for having really crappy choreography, and then Nijinsky blames Stravinsky for having bizarre music. That's just a classic case of how it can fail.
Yeah, well, and that also ultimately came down to interpretation.
It is.
Which is what exactly we're talking about.
That's the thing. That's in that case, that's what I'm saying. Like, that started with, of course, the idea of Stravinsky. I mean, granted, I guess he knew in his head, of course, this is going to be a ballet, but he didn't have any thought as to what the moves were going to be. A composer doesn't really think that way. He thought of maybe some elements where there could be something going on, something vague, but I'm sure he did not have it outlined. He didn't have any semblance of choreography written out in his music, I'm sure. And that's sort of I guess a fatal flaw, which I guess we try to avoid nowadays when we, in the Broadway scene, we try to have it a lot more integrated. It's not just, write the music, hand it off. It's a very
that actually
careful dual process.
That speaks to the whole swamp of older pop bands getting shows, like Jersey Boys. And all the stuff that's coming out there, you're taking these older pop bands, 1940s, 50s, 60s, and their pop music was designed to be danced to and to be sung and to be kind of a showpiece. But,
So you're proposing that they figured that since these guys had it written, had the intention from the get-go, that they would be more appropriate for those kind of shows?
Yeah, and how many different shows have opened up on and off Broadway just in New York in the last few months? Few months, not even years. Months.
We'll also keep in mind stuff like the Beatles and the movie That Thing You Do, which is essentially spoofing the Beatles' rise or similar rise, is the idea that all of those old rock bands were designed to dance to. Like, that was the idea. You get them on a show and everyone just jumps on the floor and dances.
Maybe early Beatles, but certainly after a point, I'm sure they had.
But that's what I'm saying. That's what That Thing You Do is based on, is early Beatles and this meteoric rise from the classic rock band. And, that idea that you can dance to it, and you can find dance really anywhere you look, if you really look. And that's why
all it really takes is an idea, which is probably the YouTube sensation. There's been plenty of crazy dances that people have done that they invented themselves, that they just felt like sort of posting as a sort of, amateur, like, hey, look at this thing I can do, sort of show and tell.
And it catches on.
It catches on, and then all of a sudden you develop a worldwide craze, and that's all because of one idea that no one else ever thought of, based on a certain music.
And penultimately, I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that's why I think dance is kind of this super genre, because it just branches out so far and can also start so many different things.
I'll say that dance isn't even a genre, it just is. It is an integral part of music.
I'd agree with that.
It's a separate medium.
It's a separate
medium.
It's a medium that it's tied. It's tied in the way that cinema ties together, the visual.
It's a
and
presentation of music. Not even a separate. It's a presentation of music. It's fairly hard to dance without music. Fairly hard. We'll say
I
that.
think
We'll
we can agree on that.
I do have one final question.
Can't counter that.
Steve, you mentioned Fantasia. What's the name of the last piece with the demon?
Night on Bald Mountain.
Okay.
You just wanted to know?
I just really wanted to know. It was bothering me. Okay. Because, the visuals...
Oh, well, and then right after that, it really technically ends with Ave Maria.
Yes. But I love the visuals of that. I want to see a dance with that.
That would be very interesting. I mean, if you could put together if you can get a choreographer, if you want to choreograph it yourself. Yes, we all know.
Food for thought. Yes, and everyone knows Fantasia.
Everyone should know Fantasia. I actually
forget about the second one, but definitely watch the first one.
No, watch the second one just for Rhapsody in Blue.
Actually, Fantasia would be something worth discussing on the podcast at a future date. I think that's something we should dive into.
I would do that in a heartbeat.
So we should look into that. I mean, I've been wanting to
in-depth analysis.
I've wanted to do a musical album and movie analysis for a while as an episode, but
I don't know if Fantasia really fits the bill, though. I mean, it's kind of divorced one aspect to the other.
I'm ignoring John and talking to Steve now because John's not making sense. Steve, do you have
it's called sarcasm.
Spam mail for us before we get into our wrap-up and our upcoming stuff?
Do you want me to have a spam mail for you?
I'd like you to.
I'm kind of over it.
Oh. Stunning story there. What happened after? Thanks.
You know what? I'm back on board.
And who is that by?
That was by Acne Vulgaris.
which is why we know it's a fake comment. It was probably on a picture, right?
No, this was actually on a recent podcast, episode 87, the Ultimate Rose Doctor Mixtape, featuring Kim and Sage of Head Over Fields.
It almost feels like a real comment.
Considering it's, stunning story there. What happened after? So we need to go back to what we said and try to
No, but here's the whole thing.
Figure out what we missed,
It wasn't a story. There is no after. It was a complete piece. It's like, and then... But there is no and then.
He can't not analyze spams.
No,
I've determined this.
No and then.
We're moving forward.
It was done once. It was an idea, and then it just took...
It just fly. So, first thing I want to bring up is... I also want to, again, thank all of those people I got to work with over the weekend for the 24-hour musicals. It's a great project, and it produces such great art. And it's a pleasure to be a part of it. So if any of you guys are listening, thanks. Next, I want to move on to... Next Monday and Tuesday is the Jewish holiday, Passover. Since that's usually when we record, we're taking a week off, so there will be no new podcast next week. So enjoy your week off, and we'll see you on the week of the 21st.
Does this mean I'm going to have to come up with more Jewish puns?
Probably.
Not necessarily.
So then, of course, the following week when we come back on the 21st, the week of the 21st, we're going to have another guest. So continuing our tradition of having tons of guests because I made friends. This is Louis Logic. I've mentioned him before on the podcast. He was at that show that I wrote about, the Nerdcore show I went to a couple months ago. He's a fantastic performer and a wonderful dude, and he's bringing us the album Roman numeral 2. So it's the Roman numeral 2, and it's by the band Unknown Mortal Orchestra. So we're also going to talk a little bit about Louis's music. You can find Louis Logic's latest album, Look on the Blight Side, on Spotify. Definitely give it a listen.
We're definitely going to be talking about his newest music.
Yeah. And so definitely tune in for that. So we will see you in 2 weeks. Enjoy your Passover if you're Jewish.
You're getting so many guests here. I just have this image of you going into various bars and eateries with that song, barely even knowing the people. Be my guest, be my guest.
No, actually, all the guests that we have on, I've gotten to know pretty well, or know all of their music. So
and his accent,
he doesn't have a sexy accent. I would respond to.
He doesn't have a sexy accent like Luminaire.
I don't.
No,
I don't sing like Luminaire.
Luminaire.
And on that terrifying note, remember as always, music is life, and life is good.